Now, we need to keep in mind the criterion of morality that Mill proposes for act utilitarianism. The one that's on the screen: an action is right if and only if no other action that the agent could have done instead has a higher utility. That is, the action is right just in case it has the highest utility. Now, let's turn to the example, or think about the example that we talked about, and let's see the kind of argument that we could make. Well, the first thing that seems to be true is, if act utilitarianism is correct, it sounds like the only moral worthy considerations would be how much pleasure and pain an act and its alternative would produce. Right? That's just what utility is. What makes it a right action is that overall you look at the action, its alternative, and the one that produces the greatest amount of pleasure minus the greatest amount of pain, the hedons, the whole dolors we subtracted, whichever has the highest utility rating, is the one that's the right action. Okay, now, if that's the case, think about the case we're considering. We're considering that the elderly woman has a decision. Who is she going to will her money to? The nephew who's fooling around, having a great time, engaged in all of his bodily pleasures. We can imagine he has a lot of money, so he's partying all day, all night, gets in a jet, moves around the world, and just continues with parties. Keeps on moving, wakes up the next day and starts all over again. He's producing a lot of pleasure. He has a lot of friends at these parties. They're having great time. They are the ultimate pursuers of pleasure, versus his sibling, who is spending his time studying, working long hours to learn to master the material to become a doctor. Well, it looks like the action that's going to have the higher utility is going to be to will the money to the first nephew, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll nephew. But if we think about it, the following seems to be the case. That is, that's not the right thing to do. Maybe that's what it looks like the act utilitarian criterion of morality says is the right thing to do. But if we think about it, we think that what the other brother is doing really is more worthy of being supported. Maybe some of you think it should be some breakdown, some percentage goes to one or the other, but let's set that one aside. So it seems that the only consideration, the only moral consideration, should not be just the pain and pleasure that an act and its alternatives would produce, and the conclusion from that being is Principle AU, or in other words, Mill's act utilitarianism, is not correct. So there is an argument made from the example. Sometimes an example like that is called a counterexample to the principle, but that's the argument formulated to show that there's a serious problem, that the principle itself, and hence the theory that it summarizes, is not correct.